MacVoices is supported by ATTO. If you are creating content with your Mac, you can add intelligence and performance to your network workflow with ATTO. ATTO Thunderbolt and Host Bus adapters are designed for collaboration like graphic design and video editing. Find out more at atto.com. Welcome back to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I am pleased, very pleased to welcome back to the show Mr. Bryan Chaffin.
Feisty!
Feisty.
Feisty Bryan Chaffin!
Feisty Bryan Chaffin.
Feisty, Chuck. Siri's not playing nice. HomePods aren't playing nice. Lost my cowboy hat at the TSA checkpoint. Your watchers have seen my... Ooh, goodness. Your watchers have seen my cowboy hat.
Yes.
I've worn it. It's gone. You know, but it's cool for health and safety reasons. They immediately throw away hats. So I'm pretty pleased about that, Chuck. I'm in a fine mood. But I do, I love New York. So,
Yeah. Well, hey, one out of, 5 or 6 things. So I guess it's been about 10, 12 days now as we record this ago. I got to see the Rolling Stones.
Wow, that's great.
It was a fantastic show. But I realized that you and Mick Jagger have something in common.
Oh my goodness. Is it my sexy dance moves?
No.
No, it is not, because I don't have any.
Okay.
What is it?
No. You both can't get no satisfaction.
Oh, that's about right. That is about right. I've been pretty cranky for a while. You know what happened while I was on vacation? Johnny Ive stepped down.
That's one of the things I want to ask.
I was on vacation. What nerve?
What? He should have checked with you first.
Yes. Oh, I was thinking about stepping down, but I thought maybe I should check the beautiful schedule of Bryan so that he can comment on it. That would be yes, you should, sir.
Well, now's your big chance right here, because I'd like to know what you make of it. What will it do for Apple, or what won't it do for Apple? Yeah. And is he really gone when he's still going to be, at least as the reports go, consulting with Apple?
I'm kidding. I don't know. It is an interesting question. It's an interesting question about what drove. I talked about a little bit about on the Apple Context Machine, my weekly podcast. This week's guest was John Keat. We talked a little bit about this, and I'm interested to see a whole lot of things. For instance, was it Tim Cook's lack of interest in design that drove Johnny out, or was Johnny's lack of interest in holding on, which is what the Wall Street Journal reported? Was it that was sort of seeming like design hasn't necessarily been at the forefront of Apple for the last few years? I imagine. All right, let me actually cut to the chase. So if you don't want to listen to ACM, here's cutting to the chase of what I think it was. I think that Tim Cook isn't as interested in design as Steve Jobs. I think that's actually certifiable and well documented. And it's not a cut on Tim Cook. Everybody is different. Everybody has different priorities, different lusts, different passions, different hopes, different interests. And I think that Johnny Ive was very used to having the CEO hyper-focused on what he was doing. And I think that Johnny Ive was probably used to having a design partner outside of his design team in Steve Jobs. There was all this talk about them being soulmates and about them being partners and all of these things. And I think that was, and not to mention, as John Keat put it, not to mention the safe bubble that Steve Jobs created for Johnny Ive. And that Johnny Ive thrived on those things And that when you took them out and when you put more and more of the responsibility and burden of design on him, like for instance, I think that I can only imagine, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I can only imagine that doing great design work and then having the CEO come in and look at it and finding the one flaw, or maybe the two flaws or the half a flaw, and like saying, fix this. That's got to like drive you. It's got to motivate you, especially when you agree with it. When you go, oh yeah, why didn't I see that? Which is how I kind of always thought that they were. Like if we go back to those descriptions of when Johnny first presented the wall, the sunflower iMac. Do you remember those stories? Like Steve Jobs talked about that, and he said, that's kind of one of the things that the design team presented to me, and I said, no, go back, because what they had done is they'd taken the original iMac and just put a flat screen on it, something similar to that, right? And we saw products like that coming out of the PC world at the time. And Steve Jobs said, no, that's not good enough. And he pushed back. And the end result was this, really interesting looking sunflower iMac or lamp. What was the nickname of that thing?
It came from Toy Story. Oh shoot!
Pixar. It's the I want to say lampshade, but lampshade isn't. Anyway, I imagine most of our listeners here probably know what we're talking about. The G4 iMac that was white, and it was on the beautiful floating arm, and it had the white base, all that stuff, and it was an incredibly innovative design for the time, and that was a product of a great design team and a CEO who wouldn't accept good enough, and we pushed back, and when you transition to a CEO with different priorities, and that CEO is like really happy with everything you do because you're so much better than he is at design, right? And I imagine that Tim Cook was probably pretty okay with just about everything the design team brought forward, and you take all of these things, and you take how incredibly hard he was working on Apple Park, and you take just essentially, 25 years of balls to the wall working, and the fact that he looked burned out. He certainly put on weight in the last few years, and that's not a criticism. He's smaller than me. He's more fit than me, but it is a difference. It is a noticeable difference in Sir Johnny, and when you put all that together, I can see it no longer being fun for him. And what kind of effect that ends up having on Apple is going to be an interesting one. Like, for instance, I always took the drive for thinness, like for everything to be in service of thinness. I always took the drive for thinness within Apple to be a Johnny Ive obsession. Like, my joke has been, my quip has been that no one is saying, boy, I'd buy an iPhone if only it was thinner. Right? No one was ever saying that, yet Apple would constantly come out with thinner iPhones and not improve battery life. As components got smaller, as technologies inside the device advanced, we wouldn't get more battery life. We would instead get the same or thinner. That inevitable drive for thinness, I always put on Johnny's shoulders. So if Johnny is gone, might the design team start ceding some of its power and authority back to engineering? Or, worse, I guess, could marketing end up exerting more power and authority? That would not be the direction I would want to see things go. But, because no one within Apple is going to, whoever takes over design at Apple, I don't care how good they are, I don't care how talented they are, they will not have the power and authority of Johnny Ive. They won't have his title. They won't have his perceived importance. They won't have his perceived power, his actual power. And that means that design is going to be less of a power base within Apple. There's no way around that. There's just no way around it. That must change. That change must happen. It will happen. It is happening. And how that affects Apple remains to be seen. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, okay. So I agree with a lot of what you said. I am disturbed. I'm disturbed by this constant, the way we constantly, and you do it, I do it. I mean, the general tech media does it, where we seem to boil down a sophisticated company like Apple to one or two people that are just making all the difference. When there is a fantastic design team, there's a fantastic engineering team, there's a fantastic product team, and yet Johnny's the only one that can do the design, or Tim's the only he's the only supply chain guy, or Steve Jobs was the only visionary. Certainly these are people that stand out in their field, but I'm not sure that with design as baked into Apple's DNA as it is, I find it hard to believe that it's not going to continue to be a big part of Apple's DNA. Maybe not in quite the same way, and to your point, maybe not quite the same drive toward thinness, because I think there are times that's been a bit of a disservice to Apple. But at the same time, it just feels like it would be giving up a major part of Apple just because one person left.
Well, I categorically disagree with you in all ways, shape, manner, and form. So, for instance, when Steve Jobs left, major changes happened at Apple. Stopped releasing new products, stopped regularly iterating on Macs, canceled products left and right, stopped releasing new software releases, except for the operating systems. And that was all because one person left, despite all the work that Steve Jobs did in cementing the Apple way of things, the Steve Jobs way of things, developing Apple University, all of those things. And it's not because Steve is the only person that could do those things, although he may well have been. It is because one person can wield a disproportionate amount of power. And I think that Steve Jobs wielded a disproportionate amount of power. He micromanaged a lot of things. I think that Johnny Ive wielded a disproportionate amount of power. And I don't like. It's like, do you remember when Tim Cook said nothing's going to change at Apple after Steve died?
Right.
He said nothing's going to change, and immediately, like one of the very first things he did was announce that Apple was going to match employee contributions for charities. It's a huge change. It's just like it was almost immediately too. There was a change, so something changed at Apple, right? And something else that changed in a tangible way for us as consumers is that Apple started pretty much meeting all of its release dates and release cycles and being able to more or less meet demand, whereas under Steve Jobs, they weren't always able to do that. Now, I think there's two reasons for that. One, the supply chain became more mature. But also, like, we know that Steve Jobs came back from one of his medical leave of absences, looked at what was being done with the iPod and scrapped it and said, no, you have to fix all these things. Right? So that device ended up being pushed back by months and months and months and months and months. And there's no one doing that at Apple anymore. So I think that's part of the reason why Apple is largely able to meet its release dates and be able to mostly meet that initial demand. And these aren't necessarily bad things. This isn't necessarily a bad change, but it is a different kind of Apple.
Okay. And I will go with that. And anybody that's worked anywhere and has a change in management where they say nothing's going to change is just, I mean, it's not a lie. It's just completely unrealistic.
It's actually impossible because, again, exactly. We're all wired differently, right? We all have different passions, interests, etc. Right? Yeah. Steve Jobs went from basically being down at design all the time not being there. And we don't know this for a fact, but I can't imagine that Tim Cook was at design anywhere near as much as Steve Jobs was. There's just no way, because
No,
he does. It's not what he's interested in. He's interested in, and I don't even think it's because he's interested in logistics or operations or anything like that. I think that Tim Cook is really motivated by these big, huge, sea change things that he's working on. The car, health records, the health records industry, Apple Watch, of course, AR. Like, I think he's a lot more interested in these big ticket items that could really change people's lives than Steve. And Steve was really interested in making the best product possible. I don't think that motivates Tim. You can't not have change with that kind of motive, with those different motivations coming to the foreground at the top of the company.
So is this, I mean, I see it as just an evolution. Okay. I see, because it would be interesting to see how Steve Jobs would have existed in a world where social media is so prevalent. And there's the opportunity for everybody to question, comment, and criticize. And Tim has seemed to have managed that well. We have a world now. One of your favorite things is this intersection of politics and technology that really wasn't quite. It wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now when Steve was there. We have we have the social pressures that were always, I think, part of Apple, but not like they are now. And it just, so I see Tim Cook having to manage a whole different world, if you will, than Steve had to.
Yeah, and I've gone on record as arguing that Tim Cook may well be the best CEO that Apple has ever had, and that I realize very much what I'm saying. I honestly don't know if I still feel that way, to be honest. I'm not actually sure. I definitely go back and forth on this, but I do think that Tim Cook is the person to transition Apple to becoming a bigger company, and transitioning Apple to becoming a bigger company in ways that Steve Jobs would not have done. And which may or may not be a good thing for Apple. It may or may not be a good thing for us as Mac fans, because remember that there's Apple shareholders, there's Apple customers, there's iPhone fans, and there's Mac fans. And there is a Venn diagram of overlapping there, but it's not like this, right? There's definitely overlapping groups within those subgroups. So I don't know. I will say that Johnny Ive not being at Apple, not being chief design officer, not getting phone calls in the middle of
Johnny calling you to apologize for leaving while you were on vacation.
Yeah, well, he should, as a matter of fact. But this will lead to changes at Apple. This will lead to changes in product design at Apple. This will lead to some things being different. And yeah, it may be an evolution, but I would actually even call it, we're probably headed to a new era, for good or for ill, in Apple product design. I mean, like, keep in mind, like, anyone who wants to minimize Johnny Ive's importance at Apple or contributions to Apple should ask themselves, if it's so easy, then why isn't everybody else doing it? Right? And nobody else is doing what Apple has been doing with design under first Steve and Johnny, and then under Johnny. Like, no one else is doing that. And like, what happens, and I don't think he would, maybe he would, but what happens if Johnny starts taking design gigs for Microsoft or Samsung or Google or LG? Like, maybe he starts designing, like, maybe the next Samsung tablet will have been designed by Johnny Ive. I don't think that's going to happen. But what would that do to Apple's differentiating factor?
Well, you're getting to something that it's always bothered me a little bit. The design has always been a differentiating factor, but what makes a Mac is not 100% the design.
No, it's not 100%, but there is a percentage.
There is a percentage, but it's the operating system. What makes an iPad is partially the design. But right now, there are plenty of tablets out there, and what makes it is iOS and the integration with the Apple ecosystem that all the devices share. And so I'm absolutely not putting down Johnny, and I'm not putting down design or the design of Apple products up to this point. But I feel like once in a while that fact gets lost because there has been such a focus on design, and sometimes to the detriment of functionality.
Yeah, well, agreed. I agree with that. And I'm hoping that's one of the things that actually gets changed without Johnny being there. I'm hoping that function starts exerting more influence. I hope that the engineers are able to exert more influence, not too much influence. I don't want it to go the other direction, but I would like to see form giving way to functionality in terms of things like thickness and battery space. And, like, do we really need to have a crappier keyboard in service of having a thinner device? Do we really need to have soldered in components in service of a thinner device? No, we don't. We don't at all. And I'm hoping that that's one of the things that we see changing. I guess we'll find out. But I had a point. I don't know what my point was. I'm lost.
That's okay. I find it really interesting that Johnny stepped down now. Angela Ahrendts has left, and there seems to be quite a bit of debate as to her effect on the Apple Store, the Apple stores. Some seems to be very positive, some maybe not so much, especially from a service standpoint. So I think that's going to be interesting. It was one thing that I wondered about with your comments about the ability to fulfill orders and all, because I seem to remember some stories that when Angela got there, she was a little bit horrified at lines around the store and people having to come and stand in line to get the products. That was not good customer service. That was not good customer experience.
Yeah, I disagree with that. Those were great experiences, weren't they?
Well, they were great experiences for us.
For fans.
For fans. Yeah. I mean, I've stood in many a line, at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, 4 a.m, waiting for something. And it was an event.
But you might see Steve Wozniak.
Yeah.
At the Mosqueda store. I mean, come on, that's exciting. It's fun for fans.
But once again, we're going to have the debate or the discussion about who is Apple building and selling things to now? Is it the fans or is it a broader audience? And the answer is obviously a broader audience.
Very obviously.
Yeah. So, at some point, is that an evolution that needed to happen? And I think it did, because frankly, as much as I enjoyed those lines, it's kind of nice to have FedEx show up at 10 a.m. and deliver my phone, on the day without me having to stand there and wait, wonder if I'm going to get what I want, and when am I going to get it?
At the time, back when they were a thing, the lines were part vindication and affirmation for our choice to be Apple customers, because the whole world got to see it. The whole world got to see this incredible demand for these devices, right? And for those of us, especially who have followed Apple who've been Apple customers for years and Apple fans for years, and in some cases Apple fanboys and fangirls for years, the world seeing those lines being covered by mainstream media, that was a big part of affirmation that yep, we've been telling you all along, right? And I don't know if any of us really wanted to admit it at the time, but in hindsight, I can certainly see it. I absolutely could tell you that was the case for me.
Oh, sure.
And now I'm forced to accept the fact that when I walk by the Apple store and see it packed, and then right across the hall I see the Microsoft store and it is not packed, That has to be my affirmation.
But Bryan, when do we stop needing affirmation? I mean, I feel like that anyone who's picked up an iPhone knows the Apple experience, and has experienced that and recognizes it. Some people value it, some people don't value it, but they recognize it.
I hear what you're saying, man, but unless you are envious of my life, I have no meaning. I'm kidding.
I wasn't sure there for a minute, Bryan.
Fine, I'm mostly kidding. But that what we're talking about, that affirmation stuff. First of all, it's many years old. It's at the tail, like it was 2 or 3 years into iPhone's existence before Apple stopped being beleaguered, quote unquote, right? And even then it was like, well, this iPhone fad is going to, immediately be crushed by this or that. So a lot of any desire to have the world seeing our lines certainly is rooted in the very old experience of Mac versus PC. And that doesn't apply to a lot of people. And to your point, it is less relevant now. Apple is anything but the underdog. Apple has tens and tens and tens and tens and scores of billions of dollars in the bank, and makes scores of billions every year. So obviously affirmation stuff, that really doesn't matter a lot, and having stuff show up at a doorstep is awesome.
And I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that experience. I mean, and again, we're now in the 21st century. We're well into the 21st century. We're pushing 20% into the 21st century, and so why are we continuing? And I do it too, but looking back on the way it used to be, let's address it the way it is. Let's address today's expectations on things.
Come on, man! Hashtag people, dude. It's just how we're wired. It's how we do.
I guess.
And not everybody does. And, some people are more than happy to move on. And there's still some people who think that Samsung is the innovative company. I mean, whatever. Everyone's wired differently. It's just the human.
Well, yeah, but I don't, I mean, look, right now I'm having some experience with I don't mind saying it, with some Microsoft products, and not Microsoft products for the Mac. I'm going to put those in a different category. This other world, it just frustrates the daylights out of me because
Microsoft
of the
world?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's
and Microsoft is a better company today than they were under Steve Ballmer.
They may be a better company, but I am not so sure about their products and their services, my friend. There was a time I didn't have some of these experiences. Now I'm having them, and they are just as bad as I anticipated. And I tried to come in with an open mind with the Satya Nadella era of Microsoft. Maybe they've learned some things. Maybe they figured it out. Still waiting to see the evidence that they figured it out. But my point is that if Apple can continue doing what it's done up to this point so far, I mean, look, yeah, we're talking technology, so there are always going to be glitches and hiccups and those kind of things. But it's still a light years better experience across the board, and that's what I want to see continue. And I'm hoping that I'm hoping Johnny's departure doesn't go in the wrong direction for that. I'm hoping Angela's departure, doesn't degrade the Apple stores, and in fact, maybe there's some opportunity here for things to get better. Because I'll throw this out and I'll let you go then. But
really, we're going?
No, I meant comment. But the very first thing that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who took her place or has stepped up into her duties. Deirdre. Right. One of the first things is she was putting up more information about the products, as opposed to
Deirdre O'Brien.
Okay, so more information about the products right there in front of you, instead of having to go and look or try to figure out what it is you were looking at. And I thought, wonderful. That's what I need, is more information. Sure, is it great to see a MacBook Pro sitting on a solid oak table and nothing else? Yeah, but I need information if I'm about to pull out my credit card. So I'm optimistic about some of the little changes I've seen. Johnny's not been gone long enough, and I'm hopeful that those positive changes will continue.
Here's a question for you: how many people? And I raised this with John on the Apple Context Machine. I'll preface this with a look back to when Steve Jobs left Apple, when he was essentially stripped of all his power by the board in 1985. And he went to Apple and said, "Hey, I'm going to go do this other thing. I'm going to make some computers aimed at the university market. Doesn't compete with you guys. I'm just going to take a couple people with me." And the board said, "Okay." The board said, "Fine," because finally they washed their hands of this troublesome Steve Jobs, and they could stop worrying about the friction between Steve and John Scully, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what does Steve do? He basically takes some of a whole bunch of Apple's top people that made the Macintosh possible, and he takes all of them. He takes a whole bunch of people, a lot more than what he said. And while I am sure that there are contracts in place and non-competes and agreements in place between Johnny and Apple, I'm wondering how many of Apple's top designers Johnny's going to take with him. And will that have an effect?
Very fair question. Very fair question.
And the mainstream media, with all of its reporter power, is going to be watching Johnny's design company like a hawk. Right? They're going to, if Johnny poaches people, we're going to hear about it. If Johnny gets contracts with the company, this or that company, we're going to hear about it. We're going to hear, I think, a lot about what that design company does. There's probably going to be, there will never have been as much attention on a design company as the attention that is going to be poured onto Johnny Ive's design company, and I don't think we're going to be left wondering much eventually.
Not sure I agree with you on the mainstream media. I think the tech media will. I'm not sure the mainstream media really knows.
Are you kidding me, man? The Wall Street Journal has got reporters dedicated to Apple.
Oh, yeah.
Reuters has reporters dedicated to Apple. Bloomberg has reporters dedicated to Apple. Right?
But that's business press. That's business press. And so I agree.
The New York Times has reporters dedicated. This is the mainstream media. And it might be their tech coverage, but it's the mainstream media's reporters that are doing this. And they're the ones that are breaking the stories. Whereas 9 to 5 Mac used to break the stories, whereas Apple Insider used to break the stories, whereas Mac Rumors used to break a lot of stories. The mainstream media and the big boys and girls have been breaking the stories for years now.
Well, sure, because we're in a much more technologically oriented world. And this is the stuff that people use every day. They didn't, I mean, in the days of the websites that you were talking about, and some of those are not all that long ago. I don't think that
they're all still publishing. We're also, the Mac Observer is still publishing. We've never really been in the business of breaking stories. That's not really
right.
Our thing. But those sites all exist. It's just the investigative leaking powers have largely transitioned to the big publications because there is money in it. There didn't used to be money in covering Apple. Now there is.
Yeah. Well, like so many things about Apple, that as their fortunes have ascended, and they got to the top of the heap, and now arguably they're still at the top of the heap. I mean, that just comes with a lot of scrutiny. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
This edition of Mac Voices is supported by ATTO Technology, the power behind the storage. For more than 30 years, ATTO Technology has been providing network and storage connectivity for Mac users. They offer the most connectivity choices for Mac OS, with a wide range of Thunderbolt and host bus adapters for high performance and low latency networked storage connectivity. No matter which Mac you use, ATTO can be trusted to provide the latest drivers and tools to meet your needs. They work with partners to deliver end-to-end solutions to better store, manage, and deliver data, your data. Network adapters, storage controllers, and more for connectivity that include Fibre Channel, SAS, SATA, iSCSI, Ethernet, and yes, Thunderbolt, are all part of what ATTO brings to the table. I've had several fans of MacVoices write me to tell me that they are using and are very, very happy with ATTO products, and they're glad to see ATTO sponsoring MacVoices. And I am too. Are you one of them? Let me know. And if you're not yet, then visit atto.com and see what they can do for you. ATTO, the power behind the storage at atto.com. That's ATTO.com. Thanks to ATTO for their support of MacVoices.
Let's shift for a second, because it's something that I was kind of interested to hear your take on. You and I have had a number of discussions about Bitcoin and about cryptocurrencies.
Yep. Okay.
I'm slightly baiting you and slightly not, because it's a real question. But
baiting me is fair.
Well, baiting you, Facebook. Facebook is getting into cryptocurrency.
Facebook says they are, yes.
Why would anybody participate in a Facebook cryptocurrency world?
Well, this is.
Am I missing it?
Yeah, you are. The better question, Chuck, is why would Facebook try to get into this world? And the reason why Facebook would try to get into this world is because they can compete with countries now, or if they ever get this off the ground. So the whole point of Facebook having a cryptocurrency is not for Facebook to have a cryptocurrency. It's for Facebook to be able to move value between their members, betwixt even their members, and without across borders, without having to, like muck about with regulations and rules and values that they don't control. Facebook getting into cryptocurrency is all about Facebook becoming an incredibly, ridiculously big player in financial services. And by using their own cryptocurrency as the foundation for that, they are if they can do what they say they're going to do, they will essentially be competing with the dollar, with the euro, with the yuan, with the ruble, with the rupee. And that's actually what makes it dangerous. And it's probably why they'll be crushed on this. There's no way governments would be foolish to allow Facebook to do this, and I don't think that they will allow them.
From that standpoint, yeah, I would agree with everything, but at the consumer level, I mean, when I first heard about this, I almost laughed. It's like, really? I mean,
you're missing it.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing what you're saying, but my first thought was I would much rather have Amazon get into cryptocurrency for heaven's sake.
Well, all right. So Facebook is aiming this partially, if not predominantly at the beginning, at emerging markets, at consumers who don't have access to financial services. Right? So, for instance, the world of remittances. So sending money home, which immigrants do. They do it from here, from the United States. Indians send billions of dollars. Mexicans send billions of dollars that they earn here in the States, and they send it back home. Same thing with much of Asia, big portions of Africa too. And this happens in Europe, and it happens in the United States, and it happens in the Mideast from the standpoint of all the guest workers that are brought in as slave labor, essentially slave labor in some of the Middle Eastern countries. They send their money home too. Same thing with Pakistan and Afghanistan and India, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are billions of dollars, tens of, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars that are that are transmitted this way. And right now, the companies that handle those remittances, companies like Western Union, make a killing. Facebook could take all of that business, charge a fraction, and by using their own cryptocurrency, still make a fortune. And now, once you've got, and the same thing too with the people like, you know, like in China, WeChat is used to pay for things and for people to send money to each other all the time, right? That is a very, Tencent and WeChat both allow this. It's a very big deal. It's kind of what Apple Pay is trying to do, and there are so many parts of the world, especially in emerging markets, where Facebook is the internet, almost like Internet Explorer used to be the internet for people. There are so many parts, so many emerging, so many people that are in Facebook's user base where Facebook is the internet. Facebook is how they communicate. Facebook is how they get their information. Facebook is how they organize. Facebook is how they is what they're doing on the internet, period. And Facebook wants to capture all of those people into its financial services because, again, these folks don't necessarily have access to a lot of financial services. Now, Facebook could go into the loan business to these folks. Facebook could even just facilitate loans, right? Microloans, for instance. Facebook could facilitate those microloans, take a little piece of it, put all the risk on everybody else, and make a fortune. And they can do all of this with their own cryptocurrency without being subject to regulation.
Okay, so the picture that you are painting is a little terrifying. Because
it's a lot terrifying.
And not just from the financial standpoint, but also, you know, you have to circle it back to the privacy. And okay, so if Facebook is looking into everybody's lives, and now they're going to be looking into their financial lives.
Yep, everything they purchase, or a lot of what they purchase, who they give money to.
Yeah, I mean, this is starting to feel, again, taken to an extreme, which that seems to be something Facebook is good at. That almost sounds Big Brotherish.
George Orwell warned us about Big Brother, which, by the way, I happen to be reading as we speak. And his concern was the government. And in reality, corporations, it's so weird to me that people freak out today, people freak out about the government having our information, yet they're okay giving it to corporate powers. Surveillance capitalism is the name that was given to me by the folks over at that computing company. Pure? Is that right? Do you remember them?
Pure?
Not Pure. Linux, privacy, computer. Purism. That was close.
Purism.
Yeah, Purism, a company that make a Linux-based computer where there's actually like hardware kill switches on the microphone and on the camera and everything like that. And the whole point of it is to not be involved in surveillance capitalism. It's the CEO of that company that gave me that phrase. But the point is that you know, in some cases, the very same people who are worried about the government having our information are happy to give it to corporations, and I don't get that. I don't understand that at all.
Well, I think I understand it because I don't think that as powerful as corporations are, people understand that they understand the power of government. They don't understand the power of some of the corporations. And just we're touching on Facebook, but there are plenty of other corporations that have that kind of
Facebook,
power.
Google, Apple, and Amazon. And
right.
Of those four companies, roughly one of them is actually dedicated to our privacy. At least today, under today's leadership.
Right.
Right. We have no idea what Tim Cook's successor will do when it comes to privacy. They could throw all that differential privacy stuff out the window. Right. They could throw all that, you know, keeping all our local information on our local devices. They could, you know, Tim's successor or that person's successor could throw all of that out the window.
And it's tough because once it goes out the window, it's almost impossible to get back.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, just like giving up power or privacy to a government. Once you do so, you're not getting it back. That is the way things work. And so, like, the idea of letting Facebook do everything that it wants to do with Libra, I am completely uninterested in being a part of it. I think that the difference between everything that Facebook has done wrong so far and everything they could do with Libra and the financial services arm that they want to develop off that is that now they're threatening control of money. And governments are not going to be keen on that. Reserve banks are not going to be keen on that. And they're going to do everything they can to stop it. And so far, either today or yesterday or both, we've had comments coming from Britain's Reserve Bank about it. And we've had comments coming from Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve here in the United States, has basically said that that there are problems with what Facebook wants to do. And that's just the beginning. Reserve banks really enjoy having the power to control money. They really enjoy that, and they're not going to want to give it up. And the associated executive branches that go along with those reserve banks also enjoy having that power, and they're not going to want to give it up either. So, and this is one of the few places where I am far more aligned with governmental desire than I am with the corporate desire. Far more. I hope Facebook gets stopped. I hope Libra gets poop canned.
So let me ask you this, if it were Apple that was proposing this, would that change your feelings?
Well, firstly, it's not Apple, right? And I think that's telling, because Apple could have gone this route. It's not like Apple doesn't know what cryptocurrencies are.
Right.
Instead, Apple has worked from within the system to bring privacy, more privacy, to offer financial services. What Apple Pay is, which is, Apple Pay is like essentially kind of like Venmo, but more specifically, it's kind of like what WeChat and Tencent do in China. The Apple Card is working within the existing system, but is taking some privacy for users and keeping it with users with Apple Card. And the same thing with Apple Pay. When you're doing your transaction with Apple Pay at a retailer, your information is safe and it's secure and it is private, mostly. And I would say that, well, you know what, Chuck, to really answer your question, I would not want Apple to have that kind of power either. As flawed as our governments are, I'm not talking politics here. I'm not talking about left versus right or Republican versus Democrat or Tory versus Labor in the UK. That's not what I mean. What I mean is flawed as Western governments are, and screw China, screw Russia, screw the authoritarian regimes. I'm not lumping them in with this. But as flawed as Western governments are, I trust Western governments with things like the money supply more than I trust an unaccountable corporation. A corporation accountable only to its shareholders.
Okay. I mean, that's a fair point. And with the scenario you just drew up, I think that's a very, very, very thoughtful answer. I mean, Facebook seems to be an automatic no. But as much as, and I think we both share a faith in Apple and in the philosophies, but it goes back to my point constantly whenever there's a political discussion. Okay, so you're comfortable giving this president your information, or maybe you were comfortable giving the last president your information, but what about the next president or the next president after that? That's where the problem comes in. That nothing here is static. Companies come and the leadership comes and goes. You'd like
And
to think that,
they're accountable to shareholders, not voters.
right.
And not all of the voters. I mean, the shareholders are never like all of the people.
Which has some advantages and disadvantages.
Correct. Correct.
So,
Yeah. I'm not actually saying that companies need to start being beholden to voters, because there's a lot of things that companies do really well and will always do better than governments. But I don't want to put a company in charge of the money supply, or even the money supply for a significant subset of the people. So there's no good's going to come of that.
well,
No
and
good's going to come out of what Facebook wants to do.
well, and you start going down the scenario of some science fiction novels of, where we have corporate states that, or corporations that rival or exceed government powers. And to your point, if they get large enough and wield enough power, they don't have to answer to the.
Look at what Facebook has already done. Look at all the ways that Facebook has screwed its user base over.
Yep.
Because they basically believe that they have the right to break things, and that rules don't apply to them, and that they can always just like first say it didn't happen, and then say, well, maybe a little bit of thing happened. No, it turns out that this big thing happened, and they get away with it constantly. Mark Zuckerberg gets away with it constantly. And my mantra about that little screwball is that he does not have the wisdom to wield the power he has amassed for himself. It's my problem with Facebook.
How can I disagree with that? I mean, okay, you make a couple mistakes, fine. You say you're going to be responsible, then you turn right around and do it again.
Keep doing it. Keep doing it.
That's where I can forgive a mistake or two. I can't forgive the pattern. And
no, I can't forgive the pattern either, and I cannot forgive. I cannot forgive what their hands-off attitude about posts has done to the world. Everything from the Rohingya massacre in Myanmar to election meddling here in the United States, the election meddling in the UK, the ways that other third parties are able to manipulate their ridiculous attitude about posts taking care of themselves, essentially, has had a devastating impact on the world, and it's continuing to have a negative influence in the world. And I hate that. And the difference, I don't think I've ever said this on one of your shows, Chuck, but like Steve Jobs was just as much in control of Apple in its early days as Mark is. And the same thing is true with Larry Page and Sergey and what's his face, Eric Schmidt too. The difference is that with the social media companies, their influence on the world has vastly exceeded the influence that Apple even has today on the world. Google more so. Like Google is closer to Facebook than to Apple in terms of the power it wields. But Microsoft Microsoft under Bill Gates has never had the power in the world that Facebook has today. Maybe even that Twitter has today, and certainly that YouTube has today. And that's the difference. Is like these tech icons who do these companies when they're young and they stay with it. And someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who is, he's too young. He does not have the wisdom to wield the power he has. He just doesn't have it.
Or he has a lot of wisdom and he just doesn't share. He has a different set of values.
I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is a bad person. Maybe he thinks that maybe he actually does think that it's okay. Like, okay, for one of the things, when Facebook was experimenting on users by giving them a steady dribble of bad news or a steady dribble of good news, just to see how it changes interaction with Facebook. That to me was pure evil. That was evil. You don't you don't experiment on your users without telling them. You don't cause people to have a bad day for your profit. And that's what they did. That's what they did with some of the people who were affected by those experiments had bad days. Maybe it affected their relationships. Maybe it affected their jobs. Maybe it affected their families. Maybe it affected the way they raised their frickin' children. All because Facebook wanted to know if it would increase engagement. Yes, screw Facebook. Ugh. Okay. That was an evil thing to do. But I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg looked at it that way. I think he looked at it as, how can we, better connect people? How can we continue to turn this platform into a way for people to come together, because that's such a great thing. And I disagree with his values there, but I don't think he's evil. I just think that the company has done evil things because of his lack of wisdom.
Well, and I mean, I think from the get-go, Zuckerberg had advocated that the connectivity. And I'm not suggesting that connectivity is a bad thing, but the openness and the sharing of virtually everything. And it promoted a culture of noise, as far as I'm concerned, because unless you are eating something really, really good, I don't need to see what you're eating every day. And yet I know people that post virtually everything, and look, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes I couldn't care less. But, that becomes part of what they want to share. And after a while, it becomes too much. I don't need to know it. And you're clogging up things that I really should know or definitely need to know.
I sort of hear you, Chuck, but I think that what is far worse is for anti-vaxxers to be able to find each other and promote their crap, and for flat earthers to be able to find each other and promote their crap to each other, for racists to be able to find each other and promote their crap, and for the incel community to be able to develop and find each other and spread their crap, their hate, their misery, their wrongness, their like factually incorrectness, and be able to find each other and encourage each other and egg each other on. I think that's a far worse problem than people showing their idiotic dinners.
Yeah, but Bryan, I agree with you. Okay, I agree with you. But how do you stop it? How do you have an open exchange of information and communication among people, and not have?
Here's where it could have been. I don't know if stopped is the right word, but Facebook and Google both had this attitude that computers can make all the decisions, right? And all we need to do is have the right algorithm, and everything's going to be peachy keen, right? But now we see and we know that YouTube's algorithms send people off into conspiracy land, right? We know this. Now we know that that Russian trolls were able to organize anti-Trump and pro-Trump rallies at the same time to foment discord, to foment chaos, to foment division. Right now, we know that and they were able to do this because the algorithms made it possible, and they figured out how to exploit those algorithms. If we'd had people in charge of deciding what could be posted, if we had people deciding what was going to be on people's news feeds, instead of these algorithms doing it, then it would have been a lot less profitable for the corporations, but it would have been human curated, which is what Apple is doing. Apple human curates stuff.
Yeah, but man, Bryan, I agree with you, but somewhere in there we have to bring up the word censorship.
No,
and Well,
whatever. Are you kidding me, man? Censorship versus the incredibly negative effects that this world has had. And it's not censorship when it's a corporation. It's censorship when it's the government. It's not related. I get to decide what is on the Mac Observer. I get to decide. If my writer writes something that I don't want to publish, I get to make that decision. Apple gets to make that decision. Google gets to make that decision. Facebook gets to make that decision. The Facebook and Google abrogated that responsibility, and they handed the decision-making powers over to computers, and the computers made really bad decisions.
Oh, listen, the algorithm thing, I'm with you on. Okay, but if the Mac Observer if the Mac Observer doesn't like a particular political party, and you're saying that it has the right not to publish that political party's platform.
I do, yes, I have that right.
Okay, so you're suggesting Facebook should have had the same ability.
Facebook does have that ability. Facebook does have that ability. Facebook is not yet a government.
Okay, but is that a good thing?
Maybe, maybe not. And maybe the marketplace would have punished Facebook, right? Maybe if Facebook was out there. Okay, all right. So the reality is that I don't think that it is I don't think it's in the public's best interest, and it's probably not in Facebook's best interest to be deciding which political party can be publishing stuff. But what Facebook can do is not allow factually incorrect crap to be put onto their platform. Facebook cannot steer people interested in this factually incorrect stuff to find each other and wallow in their own ignorance, misery.
I can't believe I'm in the position of defending Facebook, because I agree with everything you're saying. I just don't know how to go to accomplish that. Because
then maybe the reality is that it can't be accomplished. Maybe it turns out that you can't just have everything and everything's going to be fine.
So what do you do? Shut it down?
I'd love to see Facebook shut down. Sure.
Well, yeah, I knew that was coming, but I mean, listen. You see it.
I love Instagram. I'd like to point out that I love Instagram. I'd also like to point out that the Apple Context Machine has a Facebook group. You can find them by going to macobserver.com/context machine. That'll take you to our Facebook group. And Facebook groups are like the one thing I really like about Facebook.
And I like things about Facebook too, Brian. I mean, it allows you to keep up with people in a lot easier fashion, and especially the ones that are using it responsibly and in my eyes, properly. Because MacVoices has pages and a group on Facebook too. Because that's where the people are, so that's where you got to go. But I just don't know. The algorithms clearly are not doing what they should be doing, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't know
what to do about it either. But I can look at what we have, and I can say categorically that it's messed up.
I agree with that.
And I look at what Apple is doing. Apple is not censoring, but Apple is keeping lies off of its platform by human curating stuff.
Well, I'm sure we're going to get emails on this. It feels like there's a difference between curation and censorship.
Well, okay, first of all, there is a difference. For one thing, governments censor. Private platforms can do what they want. Okay, they can, but private platforms can curate. And honestly, any company that was ham-fistedly, well, I don't know. Actually, look at Fox News. Fox News is massively ham-fisted bias. It is one big bias machine in service of making money for Rupert Murdoch, by fomenting discord and fears and fear mongering and hate and they don't get punished. So maybe Facebook wouldn't have been punished. But I think any company that was showing that was curating with a political bias is probably going to be punished by the marketplace in terms of social media. I to that end, right now there are people who spew hate and espouse violence and espouse bigotry and racism right now, who are complaining about being mistreated by the social media companies for not being allowed to spew their filth. Right, that is happening as we speak. But that is different than keeping the Republican message off of your platform or keeping the Democratic message off your platform. It's a different thing.
So I don't think we have a solution here. I don't think we're going to solve it. I wish we were, but it's an interesting discussion to have. I hope we get some people to think, Bryan. Think about where they're spending their time and what they're looking at and who they're believing. And for heaven's sake, the only wisdom I guess I've learned over time is try to look at the things that you agree with, but also jump over to the other side and find the ones that you don't agree with, because I don't feel like there's anybody that's not biased anymore. Maybe you disagree with that, but I don't like siloing, and I don't silo. For instance, I follow Fox News on Apple News. I remember I had a reader because I mentioned there was some story that got pulled or something happened, and I forget what it was. But in the story, I mentioned that Fox News, that I noticed that it wasn't in Apple News. I forget the details, but in the comments, I had readers going like, "Oh my God, you follow Fox News?" Like, yeah, I do, because I don't believe in siloing. I don't believe in siloing, and Facebook not only allows but facilitates, promotes, encourages, and in some cases directly manipulates us into siloing. Siloing is bad. Don't silo. Yeah, agreed. All right. We need to wrap this up, but you got to come back more often, and we have to solve some of these things.
We're not going to solve anything. Right now, you have a percentage of your listeners who are calling me of the devil or have already canceled your subscriptions, and you're welcome for that, Chuck. And then you have other people that are going, oh my God, he's so right, and probably didn't change any minds either way.
And you know what? I give my audience a little more credit. I think that they recognize that these are important discussions to have, and it doesn't mean they have to agree with us. I don't want them to agree with us. I want them to listen and think and decide for themselves.
Sure.
And that's that. And I'm not pandering to the audience. I really do believe that, because I
you mean this audience, the best audience that anyone has ever had? Man, this is a good-looking audience too.
Oh, so. At the end of the day, did you and Jagger get satisfied?
No, I'm not satisfied. I'm pretty cranky. Like, don't even get me going about my HomePod in the bedroom playing country music while I was recording another podcast with no one else in the house. Don't even get me started about that. Like, you mentioned earlier, Chuck, you mentioned about how like Apple's experience is just so awesome. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things right now that are not awesome in the Apple world. For instance, I got 2 HomePods right here, living room TV. I can pair them, but they don't actually play as a stereo pair. Why is that? I've reset them. Why is that? Why does that happen? Why has my HomePod in the bedroom started playing music 2 in the morning? Started blaring music. I live in a duplex. The other side of the wall where the HomePod is, I've got duplex neighbors. 2 in the morning, my HomePod started playing music.
I can answer that.
What's that?
It's Facebook's fault.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Knew it.
So before we go, Where can folks contact you? I know you've talked about ACM a little bit, and you've talked about the ACM Facebook group. Where's the best place for folks to hear more of your wisdom and your thoughts?
I am the editor-in-chief of the Mac Observer at macobserver.com. I am regularly a guest on TMO's Daily Observations podcast, hosted by Kelly Gumont. And I am the host of the Apple Context Machine, a weekly podcast, when you can find all of those things at macobserver.com. Thank you.
It's great to see you, Bryan. Thanks so much for the time and for the entertainment.
It's good.
We'll do it again. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Once again, I hope this is one of those episodes I hope that made you think a little bit about some things that maybe you already made some decisions on, and maybe you'll make some different decisions, or at least your decisions will be informed. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.